Sarah. I'm the CEO of Dynamic Boards. Ona Marsh is one of our NED community members. She has chair and NED experience across a couple of different organisations, and she is going to host our speaker today. So handing over to you, Shona. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, and good to see so many familiar faces and lots of new faces today as well. So our topic today is morality and ethics as a board member, learnings from a company entering administration. And our speaker is Right Honourable Viscount Thurso PC. So he was trained by the Savoy Group, after which he was appointed the general manager of the Paris Hotel Le Lancaster. And Lord Thurso spent most of his professional life in the hotel industry. He inherited the title on the death of his father in 1995 and took his seat in the House of Lords, where he became a front bench spokesman for the Liberal Democrats. In 2001, following the reform of the Lords, he was elected MP for Caithness, Sutherland and Easter Ross, so the most northerly point in mainland Scotland, and became the first person to be elected to the Commons, having sat in the Lords without having to give up his title. He was a member of the Treasury Select Committee, the Parliamentary Commission on Banking Standards, chaired the House of Commons Finance Committee, and in 2014 was made a Privy Councillor. And in 2016 became an elected hereditary member of the House of Lords, completing a constitutional first. So he chaired Visit Scotland from 2016 to 2024, so right through COVID, and that's where I was fortunate to have been recruited to the board by Lord Thurso and the recruitment panel and guided by his leadership for 2 years. It was actually a role that I'd found advertised on Dynamic Boards, so I'm joining a big circle up today and coming full circle with Lord Thurso talking at our community meetup. He currently sits on a number of listed and private company boards, including President of the Tourism Society, Fellow of the Institute of Hospitality, an Honorary Doctor of Business Administration at Oxford Brookes University, and Chair of North Highland Regeneration Fund, amongst others. And in 2017, the Queen appointed him as her Lord Lieutenant for Caithness. So I think it's quite an honours role that we're welcoming into our NED community meetup today. So Lord Thurso, I will hand over to you, and you have about 10 minutes to share your insights and wisdom on morality and ethics as a board member.
Shona, thank you very much indeed. It's a great pleasure to be here, and Shona has given me a very fulsome introduction, which I will try to live up to. I, for the first time in my life, a couple of years ago, or 18 months ago, went through the process of a listed company on AIM going into administration. And I've been on boards now for sort of 40 plus years, and this was an absolute first. And I found some quite interesting learnings, and I just want to share the experience with you. I hope it's one you never ever have to encounter, but it raised for me some questions of things that I'd always taken for granted. And the reason I chose this morality and ethics as a board member, learning from an administration, was because you are confronted with choices where you can see what the right thing to do is, but it's not necessarily the legal thing to do or the thing that the rule book says you should do. And therefore trying to remain true to yourself, true to your own values, and at the same thing do the right thing by the different stakeholders you have and the right thing as a director becomes quite complicated. So let me just briefly take you through it and see what you think. The background to this is that there is a company here in Thurso that manufactures cells for batteries. And if you cast your mind back about 5 or 6 years ago, batteries, cells, all of that was the new frontier. You couldn't possibly lose money. There were companies springing up all over the place. None of them had factories, and some of them didn't even have any technology, but they were going to create this marvelous future. Now, the company here actually had a lot of technology and quite a lot of intellectual property. The guys who'd founded it were all from the technical world, and they had come from some quite big companies, mostly Kinetic, which is a defense company. And they put the company together, and they had acquired what was already here, which was a small manufacturing plant for cells in Thurso. And I was recruited by them because they knew I had a board background, and they wanted to grow, and they wanted some outside non-executives to come in. And around the same time, they recruited a chairman who was a very experienced chair on AIM and listed companies. So the first thing that we looked at was that the company needed to grow. We were in pre-production, although we had the small facility here, and the obvious thing was to build a what everybody calls a gigafactory. It was in fact a mega factory, it would have been, and that was going to require a great deal of funding. Up to the point where we were at that time, we had been funded by various high net worth individuals, business angels who came to us through a range of firms that specialize in that sort of thing. But the amounts of money we were moving up to, which was several tens of millions, was somewhat higher than they wished to invest, which was more around the 500,000 to 1 million sort of level. And therefore, we decided that the best way to do this was to seek a listing on AIM, to go public, and to raise institutional funds. That we did, and it was extremely successful. We were oversubscribed. We raised a great deal of money above what we'd wanted. We were looking for 8 to 9 million, and we actually raised 12. And there's a whole world of how you price and how much you sell. We could have, in hindsight, we could have probably raised more money, but that brought the difficulty with it of people might not have been so keen to get involved in a fundraising where so much of it was speculative in the future. But there was an implicit relationship that we thought we'd created with our institutional holders, that as the cash was required to build the factory and do all the other things we did to get to production, they would be there supporting us. What we didn't know was that actually we'd managed to float at a moment which, looking back, we can now see was peak battery. It was the moment when the market was most receptive, and it was the moment at which people were prepared to put money in. And almost within a month of that, the perception about where the cell market manufacturing was going to be and battery manufacturing started to slide away from the United Kingdom. And if I can put in brackets, all the other players involved in this field who were not international large car makers have actually also gone into administration, which I think shows that it wasn't so much our company as a misjudgment on the whole market. However, we then came to our need for our second tranche of funding, and suddenly all our institutions had gone a bit cold. So we actually got some quite expensive bond funding from an American finance house. We got 6 million, and that was perfectly sufficient to carry us through to the next stage, and we duly went on. In the meantime, we prepared to do another fundraising, another share round, and this time we did a lot of hard work. We talked to a lot of institutions, and it was all going swimmingly. And we duly launched our fundraising. We built a reasonable sized book, and we were due to complete on the day that Liz Truss announced her catastrophic budget. And every single one of our investors turned around to us and said, we would have invested yesterday, we are not investing today. And our finance vanished. And from that moment on, we were on the back foot with a cash burn where we were going to run out of money. So to begin with, we thought, well, okay, it's a setback, but we'll see how we can work this through. And then gradually it became clear that working this through was not really too much of an option. We had an agreement with the Scottish Government for a site in Dundee. We had a MOU with Scottish Enterprise. We had some funding from Highlands Lines Enterprise. And we had a very good story to tell, but we couldn't attract anybody to fund us at that time. So that brought us into what became a sort of long, slow car crash. And behind this was, we discussed at the beginning of this sort of 6 to 8 month period as a board, we said, should we just shut up shop now? Do we just say, well, we've still got 1 million in the bank. That's it. We will pay off as much of the people we can. We'll sell the business for whatever we can get for it. And that's it. And we walk away from it. We felt that that would have been wrong, given the number of dedicated people in the company who were working very hard with a product that we all actually believed in. And Fortuitously, at that moment, a Saudi Arabian family office, private investor, approached us with an offer to take the whole company private and to carry on the development in the UK, but base the company in Saudi. And this looked like a very, very reasonable thing for us to do. And so we did, as you would imagine, a fair amount of due diligence. They turned out to be a reputable family. They turned out to be billionaires. And it was actually the eldest son of the father, who had his own family office, who was looking to do this investment. And it came to us via an institution that we knew and respected. Cutting a long procedure short, at the end of the day, they kept promising that they'd do the deal next week, and the day when the deal was done just never came. We arrived at the moment where we were having weekly board meetings and discussing how we would deal with this. And at every single one of those board meetings, the key question that we were asking ourselves was, do we have sufficient funds to continue to trade? Because if you have insufficient funds to trade, you are trading while insolvent, even if you have positive net assets. And if you're trading while insolvent, that is a crime and can get you into a lot of trouble. The second thing, is there a reasonable expectation that the funding will come through? And for much of this process, well, for all of it, up until we pulled the plug at the end, the answer was yes. And what is the cutoff point at which our cash runway becomes insufficient to ensure an orderly administration? And this is one of the things you've really got to think about, is how much money do you need to leave at the point when you call in the administrator so that the administration is orderly and he can do his job? So we would discuss at great length all of those issues. One of the things we did right at the beginning, early on, was to get hold of a very good insolvency practitioner who advised us on all of these questions and of all the things that we should do. And ultimately, when we did go into administration, they were the people who were appointed to undertake it. What I found was that, firstly, there was a terrible tendency amongst my board colleagues to ask for advice and then go with the advice regardless of what it was, and not to make the distinction between the advice of what is permissible, what you can do, what you should do, as opposed to, or what is the right thing to do. What the advisors will tell you is, you could do this, you could do that. If you do that, that might be the bad thing, that might be the good thing. If you do that, you could get into a lot of trouble. And if you asked the straight question, what exactly should I do? They'd say, you're the directors, you make the decision. And I think we were falling into that trap of trying to seek somebody, because a lot of professional life, the lawyers say, here is how it's done. If you do a float, they say, here is how you tick this box, say this, and it's a done deal. When you're in administration, they don't give you that advice. They just tell you what's legal and what's not legal. And you have to really think through, therefore, what you think is right. And what you think is right is a combination of what you are permitted to do, what is actually legal to do, but also what is the right thing to do vis-a-vis your stakeholders. The moment you're coming close to an administration, you actually only have one stakeholder, and that's or set of stakeholders, and that is the creditors. You completely stop having any regard to your shareholders as primary stakeholders. You are entirely, as a director, responsible for thinking through, what do you do with the creditors? So within that, you're also thinking about, hang on, what about the people we employ? What's my duty to them? What about the small tradesmen? Because HMRC are going to be all right. The VAT money is going to go first. But what about the plumber who fixed that thing and he did it on tick because he knows and he can trust us, and he's not going to get paid? So all of these things come in to be discussed. So What I found was that I had to think for myself more in that situation than probably in any other board situation that I have been in. And I actually found myself politely arguing with my fellow board members and saying, no, I have come to a view and I am not prepared to do X, or I have to say we've got to do Y. And I think we all developed in that way. And actually, curiously, as we were sort of dying on the vine, we became a very good board and had some of the best board discussions I ever had. But such is life. So to wrap this up, because I think I've well and truly overreached the time I was allocated, for me, what was clear was one, getting that insolvency practitioner in early on. Two, having really robust discussions with my colleagues and actually disagreeing perfectly amicably, but thrashing through each point with people changing their minds during the discussion, but learning to trust my own judgment as much as anything else. And then ultimately trying to do what was right for my values as well, obviously, as what was legal. And that's why, working with Shona and Sarah, we came up with these 3 questions for you, which you'll get in a minute, but I just wanted to spend a second on, which was, have you needed to take decisions that are legal, which would conflict with your ethical and moral principles? And I came dreadfully close to that. And that's worth thinking through as to how you deal with that. The second one was avoiding groupthink in difficult situations. How do you ensure you consider all the facts and options rather than accepting a collective view, and indeed sometimes a collective view that may be steered in your direction by advisors who I rather cynically think at the end of the day are more interested in being paid sometimes than necessarily giving you the best possible advice. But with my apologies to all of the lawyers who are on this call. And thirdly, good advice is expensive. And when cash flow is tight, how do you balance out the need to conserve cash with ensuring that the board is properly advised? Last word, we ended up being able to sell the business for £3 million, which was well below its book value, but to the former chief executive who had left the board at that point, and he is still carrying on the work, and the factory in Thurso is still running, and the people are still employed. So in that sense, we had a good outcome in that we were able to keep people in employment, which was one of the most important things for me. The sadness for me is I think it's an indictment of how British pre-production high-tech companies in manufacturing fail to be properly funded. And I have argued in Parliament that we're not very good at it. And therefore, the sadness is that there are probably never going to be truly British IP cells manufactured other than in very, very highly specialised situations. But I'll leave it at that. And I hope I've given you something to think about out of that extraordinary experience that I had.
Thank you, Lord Thurso. I think you bring out some really interesting pieces there, is that we've got no instruction book for actually how this role plays out. And while we get principles and guidelines as to how an effective board member operates or what you have to operate within legally, I know in Scotland we have the principles of public life that we follow as a board member, but no instructions on specifically how you make decisions or how you should guide your organisation. It's an interesting case study for us to think about as we come to those questions. So question number 1, have you needed to take decisions that are legal but which conflict with your ethical or moral principles? Avoiding groupthink in difficult situations, how do you ensure you consider all the facts and options rather than accepting the collective view? And if your judgment varies from the group, how do you engage constructively? I think Alistair Campbell on The Rest is Politics describes it as disagreeing agreeably. And number 3, good advice is expensive. When cash flow is tight, how do you balance the need to conserve cash with ensuring the board is properly advised? So we have 2 minutes now to reflect on these personally, and then Bex will pop us into the breakout rooms.